Howdy and welcome back to Beezy Stream of Consciousness podcast. This is episode 11, and I am Beezy, your embattled host. Today's show is brought to you through the tech wizardry of Audacity and distributed by Podbean. Musical expertise by Soundroll. Today is Friday, May 31st, 2024, and today is Top 10 Friday, as well as Story Time. Last week we did the Top 10 Dallas Cowboys quarterbacks. So today, we're going to go to the music world, and we're bringing you the top 10 Rush songs compiled by me, your host. We talked a few episodes ago about Rush, the Canadian power trio that was active from 1968 until 2015. Their catalog is extensive. 33 studio, live, and compilation albums, 24 certified gold, 14 platinum, 3 multi-platinum records, which puts them third only behind the Beatles and the Rolling Stones in such categories. So that's pretty impressive. So we will get to that here momentarily, so stick around. Okay, I had to twiddle some knobs and make some technical adjustments, but we are back and we're ready to start our top 10 favorite Rush songs. Number 10 on the list is Presto from the album also titled Presto from 1989. Presto is the last of the 80s albums known as the synth period, where synthesizers became not really a lead instrument, but the emphasis on synthesizers, which was part of the musical scene in the 80s as far as the popular music went. A lot of Rush purists don't like the period. They don't like the albums for the most part. I am not one of those people. That is my favorite Rush era, as you will find out from my catalog of top 10s. But I don't think it was so much a question of the synthesizers were overpowering. I think it was a question of mixing. When the guys play those songs live, they sound better to me than they did on the albums, and that was I think that was a function of the way that those albums were mixed and engineered at the time. A lot of people don't like the fact that Alex's guitar playing took a back seat to the synthesizers. I've heard both schools of thought on that. I think it's more a question of mixing. But anyway, Presto was there were a couple of memorable tracks from Presto, or actually 3 memorable. Show Don't Tell, Presto itself, and The Pass. The rest of the album is middling, in my opinion. A couple of fun tracks, but by and large, Presto was not. It would not make it in the top 5 albums of Rush's catalog, which is unfortunate. But nevertheless, we do like the title track, and so I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the lyrics and the structure of the song. Lyrics. They start off, if I could wave my magic wand, I am made from the dust of the stars and the oceans flow in my veins. Here I hide in the heart of the city like a stranger coming out of the rain. Goes on and on. Let's see. I'm not one to believe in magic, though my memory has a second sight. I'm not one to go pointing my finger when I radiate more heat than light. Don't ask me. I'm just improvising my illusion of careless flight. Can't you see my temperature's rising? I radiate more heat than light. That is some of the lyrics from the song. Of course, I don't think Neil ever wrote poorly as far as lyrics are concerned, so it's very well done there. A couple of interesting notes about the song is it starts off with Alex playing a couple of power chords, then goes into a little synth background. And then as Geddy starts singing, you get Alex goes into playing on an acoustic. Live, the way that he did that which was different from previous albums where he would kind of toggle between electric and acoustic, where he would actually physically play an acoustic that was mounted on a stand on stage, and then he still had his electric strapped on, and so he would go between the two. But in this case, he had a special guitar made with a piezo chip, and he would flick that when he wanted to play the acoustic part, and it enabled his electric guitar to sound acoustic. So anyway, that is number 10 on our list, Presto. Number 9 on our list is Temples of Syrinx off of 2112, their album in 1976. 2112 was a concept album. The entire first side was a concept about a dystopian society that was ruled by the priests of the Temples of Syrinx. It is track 2 in a greater song structure. There are, I think, 6 specific songs on side 1, of which Temples of Syrinx is track 2. Concert favorite, of course, 2112 was the album that got Rush on the map. It was their 4th studio album. We talked about that in a prior podcast. So, but at the near the end of every show, they would play the Temples of. They would play the overture to 2112 and then Temples of Syrinx at least. In later shows, they would sometimes play the entire first side of or side 1 of 2112. So, at number 9 we have Temples of Syrinx. Number 8 is kind of a deep track off of Permanent Waves in 1980. Is Entre Nous. It is the 4th track on the album, and the title is French, a nod or an homage to the French-Canadian aspect of them being Canadians, of course. And it means between us, and that is a significant line throughout the lyrics, is just between us, so on and so forth. But it's a study on relationships, basically between two people. Neil writes, it's probably autobiographical. Here, I'll read some of it to you if I can find it here. Bear with me just a second. Go to Permanent Waves. And there we go. Entre Nous. Okay. We are secrets to each other. Each one's life a novel. No one else has read. Even joined in bonds of love. We're linked to one another by such slender threads. We are planets to each other, drifting in our orbits to a brief eclipse. Each of us a world apart, alone and yet together, like two passing ships. And then the chorus, just between us, I think it's time for us to recognize the differences we sometimes fear to show. Just between us, I think it's time for us to realize the spaces in between leave room for you and I to grow. So yes, it's a song about relationships. I'm sure Neil is talking about his relationship with his first wife, Jackie, and their differences, and how if you approach the differences properly, they can embellish both parties, and I've seen that in my own marriage. So I agree. So that is number 8, Entre Nous, off of Permanent Waves. Number 7 is a fan favorite. It is Closer to the Heart off Farewell to Kings in 1977. It is track 3. It famously on their second live album, Exit Stage Left, they were in Glasgow, and they were playing the song, and it was such a fan favorite that at every show the entire audience sings along with them, but they sang so loud that it almost drowned out the band. And so that made it to the live album in the live version. They played the song so much that they got tired of playing it, and they struck it from the live list, and fans spoke out against that because they wanted to hear it. So In later years, they would do some different things with it. They would, the solo was more involved, or they would segue into other songs. Or there's one version on the, I think, the Time Machine tour in 2011, where they changed the key, um, the musical key. Getty sang it because he was losing his upper register. He kind of changed some things up. It's not one of my favorite versions, but probably the best version is the live version off of A Show of Hands from 1988. So I would recommend that. But yeah, that is number 7, Closer to the Heart. Number 6 on our list comes off their last studio album, and uh, that was from Clockwork Angels in 2012, and the song is called Carnies, and it's about circuses and carnivals and the people that work there and so forth. It is track 5 on that album. Remember that Clockwork Angels is a concept album, although every song can stand on its own. Um, and I would One of the things I would like to do is I would like to read the novelization of A Clockwork Angels, just to get a deeper appreciation of the overall story and how each of the songs on that album fit in. But for those of you who like hard driving Rush with great guitars, great drums, I mean, where there's a lot of energy, that is definitely a song you want to hear. And that is Carnies from Clockwork Angels. That's number 6. Number 5 on the list is a deep track off of Power Windows from 1985, and that is Emotion Detector. And that again, that's a deep track, never been played live to my knowledge. Doesn't get a whole lot of airplay, but I want to read the lyrics to you. It is a beautiful, beautiful song. Great drums in it. Just very compelling. So let's get to that. And here we go. Emotion Detector. Here we go. And listen closely to this. When we lift the covers from our feelings, we expose our insecure spots. Trust is just as rare as devotion. Forgive us our cynical thoughts. If we need too much attention, not content with being cool, we must throw ourselves wide open and start acting like a fool. If we need too much approval, then the cuts can seem too cruel. And then the chorus. Right to the heart of the matter, right to the beautiful part. Illusions are painfully shattered, right where discovery starts, in the secret wells of emotion buried deep in our hearts. It's true that love can change us, but never quite enough. Sometimes we are too tender, sometimes we're too tough. If we get too much attention, it gets hard to overrule. So often fragile power turns to scorn and ridicule. Sometimes our big splashes are just ripples in the pool. And that is Emotion Detector. It is a beautiful, beautiful song. Highly, highly recommended if you're a deep track guy, kind of like me. Um, you'll definitely enjoy the counterpart in the solo of the guitar and the drums. Neil said that was one of his favorite drum pieces to write. So that is number 5 on our hit parade. Number 4 is Xanadu off of A Farewell to Kings in 1977. It is track 2. There were only 2 tracks on side 1. There are those that say that is their best song. I agree. It's near the top. I don't see it as their best. Rick Beto of YouTube, musical producer and fame, he says that's his favorite, and he devotes an entire part or a YouTube episode of what makes that song great. And I strongly recommend you view that, because it really peels the onion back on the song, all the aspects of it. It's a long song. I'm not going to read you the lyrics in full, but it is about. Let's see. Let me get over to it. apologize. I should have been more prepared here, but it's okay. We'll soldier on through. Okay. All right. Xanadu. To seek the sacred river Alf, to walk the caves of ice, to break my fast on honeydew and drink the milk of paradise. Anyway, just a great song. I mean, it's you'll go 7 or 8 minutes into it before you actually get Getty singing, but the guitars, both lead and bass, the drums, all of the different voices that Neil uses. Um, this was Rush's first formal foray in experimentation with keyboards. There's some great key work there by Getty, and so I strongly strongly recommend you looking up Xanadu on Farewell to Kings. You'll definitely enjoy that. That is number 4 on our list. Number 3 on the list is The Body Electric off of 1984's Grace Under Pressure. It is track 5, and that is the song that got me started with Rush. When I heard The Body Electric for the first time, I was hooked. It's very interesting musical composition, great lyrics as always. It's about an android that wants to become human. That's always a fun concept, but it has the familiar, at least to Rush fans, chorus of 1001001, and so. But some great tom work to begin the song, segues into some hard plucking of the bass strings by Getty to get the bass effect, and then followed up by Alex's inimitable guitar playing. So that's number 3 on our list, The Body Electric. Number 2 is another track off of Clockwork Angels. This is The Anarchist, and it is track 4. Pretty dark song as far as lyrically and musically. It starts off with, again, some very intense tom work by Neil, accompanied by some, they call them musical events of bass accompaniment, and then some hard driving guitar work by Alex. So again, if you pine for the days that Rush just sounded like a 3-piece, with that hard rock edge to it, then The Anarchist is definitely for you. And I won't get into all of the lyrics, but again, Clockwork Angels is a concept album, and the Anarchist is the antagonist in the story, and the lyrics talk about his feeling a pariah from society, and his bitterness and his anger, and it's pretty deep, pretty dark stuff. So, but still, it's a great hard driving 6-minute song. You'll love it. And then let's move to my favorite. My number 1 on the hit parade is Mission off of Hold Your Fire in 1987. A lot of rock or Rush purists don't like Hold Your Fire. They think it's a overly synthesized, overly produced album. I disagree. I think it's one of the strongest albums from the 80s, with apologies to, of course, Permanent Waves and Moving Pictures, but it's still a great album. There's a lot of great tracks on it, but I want to read the lyrics off of it to you. It very compelling, very beautiful, and I never get tired of hearing it. In fact, that was one of the tests for how I was going to pare down my original list of about 50 Rush songs to 10. I wanted to find those that I never get tired of hearing, because I've got them all on my phone. and I listen to them in the car. So, but here we go. This is Mission. Hold your fire, keep it burning bright. Hold the flame till the dream ignites. A spirit with a vision is a dream with a mission. I hear their passionate music, read the words that touch my heart. I gaze at their feverish pictures, the secrets that set them apart. When I feel the powerful visions their fire has made alive, I wish I had that instinct, I wish I had that drive. Spirits fly on dangerous missions, imaginations on fire, focused high on soaring ambitions, consumed in a single desire. In the grip of an aimless possession, a slave to the drive of obsession, a spirit with a vision is a dream with a mission. I watch their images flicker, bringing light to a lifeless screen. I walk through their beautiful buildings and I wish I had their dreams. But dreams don't need to have motion to keep their spark alive. Obsession has to have action. Pride turns on the drive. It's cold comfort to the ones without it, to know how they struggled, how they suffered about it. And then here, this is my favorite. If their lives were exotic and strange, they would likely have gladly exchanged them for something a little more plain, maybe something a little more sane. We each pay a fabulous price for our visions of paradise, but a spirit with a vision is a dream with a mission. So that is Mission, and I love that song. That last stanza is just gorgeous. So honorable mentions, Chemistry, Prime Mover, BU to B, Where's My Thing, Limelight, Subdivisions, Turn the Page, YYZ, and Natural Science. I wish I could have incorporated all of them, but if 10's the number, then 10's the number. So that is Top 10 Fridays, Top 10 Rush favorite songs. Thank you, and stick around. We'll be back for Chapter 2 of Cloaks and Barbs. All right, for story time, we have Chapter 2 of Cloaks and Barbs, and here we go. Chapter 2, Reich Chancellery, Berlin, August 6, 1943. Hitler stood facing the enormous floor-to-ceiling bookshelf in his private study. His intense eyes flickered over the spines of the volumes on the shelves, but he was not reading them. He was considering the contents of a scroll that the men seated around his marble-topped conference table were at that moment studying. Well, he demanded without turning, speak, any of you. Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel, chief of the Supreme Command of the Armed Forces, cleared his throat. To be frank, mein Führer, he began as he handed the scroll to the man seated to his right, Grand Admiral Karl Donitz. I would have thought this to be some sort of Allied deception, had I not seen the body of that Bote. Mengele has determined that it was not human. Mengele spoke up from his place near the window that looked down on the Wilhelmstrasse, the street that ran along the front of the Chancellery. It was most definitely not human, said he. It was a biped and resembled humans in that it had 2 arms and 2 legs attached to a torso and a head, if one could call the thing on its shoulders a head. Nevertheless, that is where the similarities to our physiology end. Its brain was much larger than ours and actually extended down into its thoracic cavity. I could find no heart or pumping mechanism as such. And yet it bled red blood, observed Hitler, shuddering as he remembered. Indeed, yes, agreed Mengele. How the blood was moved is a matter that still escapes me. However, with more time, I am sure that I can discover the mechanism. As for the rest, there were 6 organs in the torso whose functions I cannot explain. There were no lungs. But it spoke, said Bormann from his place by the great double doors. How could it do so without breath? We discovered a strange mechanism in the thing's mouth that appeared to mimic sounds, but how it did so at this time is still under investigation. Hitler angrily waved his hand and spun on his heel. So, we have determined that it is something alien to us, he said as he leaned against the table and glared at the assembled military men and scientists. So be it. The question that I have for you, gentlemen, is what do we do now? You have studied the scroll and read its contents. What do you think, Hermann? He asked Reich Marshal Hermann Göring. The head of the Luftwaffe shifted his considerable bulk in his chair and looked up at Hitler. If they give us a way to defeat the Allies, we take it, he said simply. Do you not think that we can defeat them without assistance from these people? Of course we will win, mein Führer, Göring said quickly. However, We would do well to examine all options. We are always open to new technologies, no? Why should we not consider new allies? The scroll mentions that they will send an advance party if they have not already done so, put in Keitel. They said it would come from the sky and arrive off the coast. That, I believe, puts the matter in the hands of donuts, yes? All eyes turned to the Admiral. Since most of our U-boats are now either in coastal waters or in the Mediterranean, we will have an able search force, he said. I believe the scroll also indicated that they would contact us via wireless? Yes, said Keitel, and I have all of our radio operators listening for any unusual signals. Hitler turned to his left and addressed the hawkish field marshal who sat silently smoking a long, thin cigar. The Fuhrer wrinkled his nose as the blue smoke slowly ascended towards the ceiling. You've been very quiet, Rommel, he said. What do you think of all this? Erwin Rommel exhaled more smoke and tapped the ashes into a crystal ashtray at his elbow. No one has brought up the possibility that these visitors could use their weapons on us, have they? He asked. If they can destroy the Allies, then can they not do the same to us? What do we have that makes us so interesting to them? The message said that a victory over England will allow them to have a base of operations in Europe, explained Bormann. They seem particularly interested in Scotland. Why, I cannot imagine. Why not approach the British directly, asked Rommel suspiciously. Why involve us at all? He took another long drag at his cigar. No, I do not like this. I sense great danger in this contact, and I fear that if we deal with these visitors, it will be akin to making a pact with the devil. I agree, my Fuhrer, said the Admiral. We should approach this matter with great caution. If these visitors are as powerful as they say, they could destroy us both us and the Allies. Rommel is right. Why involve us at all? The message is vague on that point, Hitler conceded with a nod. When I first spoke with Bote, Bormann said, he indicated to me that he felt the Third Reich would be the better ally for his people when they ultimately arrived. He mentioned that the British and Americans would never consent to sharing their lands with his people. Perhaps we should discreetly make contact with their advance party and explore this matter further, suggested Göring. For my part, any enemy of my enemy is my friend, at first. He grinned devilishly. My Fuhrer, I will make arrangements for more coastal patrols by our aircraft, and there will be planes laden with radio gear. This all seems so surreal, said Hitler softly. He looked down at the conference table and gently ran his fingers over the marble. People from another world coming here to help us defeat the Allies. He closed his eyes tightly. Perhaps there is another explanation, gentlemen. They all leaned forward expectantly. Perhaps these visitors are actually messengers from God to help deliver victory for the fatherland. He opened his eyes and looked at his men. If this is so, then we must do everything that we can to assist them. Rommel was unimpressed. And if they are emissaries of the devil, mein Fuhrer, what then? Hitler stood and ran a hand through his unctuous hair. In that case, he said, we will deal with them as we dealt with Bote. I doubt they will make that same mistake twice, Rommel said quietly as he stubbed out a cigar. His Majesty's Naval Base Portsmouth Harbor, England, USS Barb. Matthews and Dunaway watched from the bridge as their crewmen, along with several British stevedores, manhandled crates of supplies through the aft escape trunk. Boxes of canned goods, bags of fresh vegetables, and containers of various other supplies passed by hand from the British naval pier down into whatever space was available aboard Barb. Fuel crews snaked long black hoses from fuel bowsers on the pier and connected them to the submarine's diesel tanks. Up forward, a pier-side crane lowered 21-inch diameter Mark 14 torpedoes into the sub's torpedo loading hatch to replace the ones fired the previous day. The fresh fruits, vegetables, and milk would be welcome additions to the crew and wardroom messes later that day, as the majority of fresh stores had nearly been exhausted. Tonight, the men would enjoy fresh lettuce and tomatoes in their salads, and tomorrow morning, fresh eggs and potatoes would accompany their breakfast bacon. The topping off of the fuel tanks would allow an extra week's patrolling the Atlantic's shipping lanes. Presently, a British seaman appeared, running down the pier and dodging the lines of men heaving boxes hand to hand. He crossed the brow, saluted the quarterdeck, and ran to the bridge. Commander Matthews, sir, said the young Englishman as he looked up from the base of the conning tower. I have a message from your Admiral Jones. Bring it up, Matthews said. The young man, he couldn't have been older than 17, Dunaway thought, climbed up to the bridge, saluted, and handed the message to Matthews, who scanned it quickly. "Very well," he said. "Tell the Admiral I will be there in 10 minutes. He turned to Dunaway. "See to the provisioning, Robert. Have the engine room ready to answer bells at 1700. Aye, aye, Skipper." "I have a jeep waiting for you, sir," said the young seaman as he followed Matthews down the ladder and onto the deck. Matthews rode across the British base to the American headquarters building and passed by the armed United States Marines at the door. He went down 2 flights of stairs from the main lobby and found Rear Admiral Michael Jones, United States Navy, sitting at a desk in a small office next to the cryptographic office. Jones, a former submariner himself, commanded all of the American submarine forces in the North Atlantic. He was tall and thin, and he wore a grim expression. He sat behind a simple oak desk that was covered with patrol reports from the boats under his command. When Matthews entered, Jones stood and shook hands and then gestured to one of the seats in the front of his desk. "Sit down, Commander," he said in a deep voice. "You don't have much time, so I'll give it to you fast. Donuts is pulling his boats in," he began as soon as Matthews took a seat. "We figure he's unhappy about losing a bunch of boats over the last 90 days. I know I would be. In any event, it's going to open up the shipping lanes quite a bit, and my hope is to see several more convoys make it across intact before either the Grand Admiral or Schicklgruber himself changes his mind. Now this is where you come in. Most of the fleet boats are going to the Pacific. Nimitz and Lockwood are really putting the kibosh on Jap shipping, and they need boats like yours that have the range to keep the Japs bottled up close to home. That leaves me with a bunch of S-boats and Tambors to battle the U-boats. Not that they're bad boats, but you know what I mean. What I'd like to do is, well, sort of delay releasing the few fleet boats I have like Barb to Lockwood. We've got an opportunity here, Matthews, which we might not get again. If I can establish a submarine perimeter from Portugal all the way up to Norway with the boats I have, I stand a good chance of killing at least half Donut's Pig's boats before we make the invasion next year. We know that they're trying to build newer boats at those new subpens at Hamburg and Brest, and I've got the Army to promise me that they'll keep bombing those things day and night." He paused for breath and a sip of water. "Okay, sir," said Matthews. "We'll go wherever you tell us, of course. You want us to stake out a particular port?" Jones shook his head. "No, not any particular port. What I propose is for each boat to have its own kill zone, a chunk of ocean that belongs to that boat and that boat alone. Anything that enters that kill zone, anything, Commander, gets killed. Lockwood is doing the same thing in the Pacific, and he's even stealing our combined tactics that we stole from the Krauts, but that's life. Now here's where I want you to take Barb." He tapped the Atlantic Ocean map that hung on the wall behind his desk. "Right here between the tip of South Wales and the northern coast of Brittany, the eastern boundary of the Celtic Sea. The western mouth of the English Channel," Matthews observed. "That's a lot of water, sir. Will I have any help?" "None of the Brit boats will be helping us in this operation. We've released them into the Atlantic and Med for standard patrols. For our purposes, I've got Thresher and Tuna patrolling the channel further northwest," said the Admiral. "There will be half a dozen S-boats in the North Sea to back them up. Backstopping you will be," he consulted a list on his desk, "S-19, S-24, S-33, and Pompano. They're already on station just waiting for you to reprovision. I think you know a couple of their skippers, too." He handed Matthews a thick envelope. "Those are your specific orders with your kill zone coordinates. Remember, Commander, once you're inside your kill zone, anything else in there with you is fair game." "Yes, sir," said Matthews, "and I take it that if I stray out of my zone and into somebody else's, then you're fair game," said Jones. "You're a damn fine sub-skipper. Bag me some U-boats and come back here with a broom lashed to your mast." He took Matthews' hands and pumped it. "Good luck and good hunting, Matthews." "Thank you, sir." Allied Listening Post, Santiago 4, near Swansea, Wales. "If we can see Jerry's cards, lassies, we can shorten this bloody war," Group Captain Nigel Hawthorne told his mixed crew of British, French, and American cryptologists at Santiago 4, one of the many Allied listening posts that dotted the British coastline. Santiago 4 was, to the untrained observer, little more than a wooden hut situated some 300 yards from the rocky cliffs of South Wales. The nearest city, Swansea, was 15 miles away, and the local citizenry rarely visited this forlorn part of the coast. With the ever-present specter of German bombardment looming over them, most of the locals had moved further inland anyway. They would have been surprised to learn that the wooden hut was merely a ruse, and that the unusually tall windmill behind the hut was not merely a windmill. 50 feet below the hut was an operations center for cryptanalysis. 15 trained women and one Royal Air officer lived, worked, ate, and slept in an underground complex that was devoted to capturing, decoded, processing, and forwarding German radio signals to more senior analysts in London. The oversized windmill behind the hut was in fact a very sensitive radio receiver that could detect signals generated from places as far west as Bern, Switzerland, and as far north as Trondheim, Norway, as far east as the Labrador coast, and as far south as Malta in the Mediterranean. Utilizing the most secret and sensitive of radio receivers, the staff of Santiago 4 and its sister listening post were able to listen in on radio traffic throughout the reach of the Third Reich. The 5 American women at the post were all waves, women accepted for voluntary emergency services, the brainchild of Eleanor Roosevelt, who had pressured the American Congress to establish a U.S. Navy counterpart to the WACS, or Women's Army Corps. All 5 of the women had been chosen because of their fluency in French, German, and Spanish, and all had received intensive training in the States and more in London. All were in their early 20s, and all were single, a strict requirement for the posting. Lieutenant J.G. Barbara Louise Moore was the brightest, oldest, and prettiest of the group, and by default had become a sort of big sisters to her fellow Americans. She was the best with languages and had the fastest translation times by far. Even the French and British women, who initially had been slow to accept the Americans, had at last conceded that Barbara was the best operator at the post. Group Captain Nigel Hawthorne, a former RAF Hurricane pilot who had been grounded after losing the lower portion of his right leg to a German Me-109 cannon during a dogfight, especially liked Barbara. He could count on her to do the fastest translations with the fewest errors, and that he could count on her to keep the other Yank lassies in line and on task. He also liked that she could hold her own with the British operators, who were notorious sticklers for detail, as well as the French women, who tried very hard not to get along with anyone. The women were organized into 3 shifts, midnight to 8, 0800 to 1600, and 1600 until midnight again. Hawthorne had initially tried to mix the nationalities on each shift, but that had not worked out very well, as the French did not like working with the other women. The British were too overbearing, and the Americans were too, well, different for everyone's tastes. In the end, he grouped the women by nationality and rotated the shifts. The results were striking. Each shift tried to outdo the other shifts. Now the work was getting done, and each nation was driving the others to do better. Within 6 weeks, Santiago 4 received the highest efficiency rating of any of the South Welsh listening posts. This afternoon, the Americans had the watch, and 4 of the women, Ensigns Hattie Anderson, Eunice Bunker, Catherine Reese, and Thelma Taylor, sat before their radio sets in the operations room of the bunker. Behind them, on a slightly raised dais with an array of radio controls in her hands, sat Barbara as the watch supervisor. Each woman had her own set of frequencies that she was to monitor, and Barbara could listen in on whichever frequency she chose, literally with the flick of a toggle switch. The air in the ops center was thick with cigarette smoke, as all of the women were smokers, and each had her own ashtray overflowing with butts. Hawthorne entered the ops center from his office in the back of the room, walking quietly and pulling thoughtfully at his ever-present briar pipe, which contributed to the acrid atmosphere with a more aromatic pong. He stopped at the supervisor's table and surveyed the stack of traffic that his American contingent had intercepted during the midday shift. There was quite a bit of traffic already that needed to be forwarded to his headquarters in London, codenamed Station X. He tapped Barbara on the shoulder. She looked up at her boss and removed her headphones. "A word with you, please, Lieutenant," he said, and walked back to his office with the traffic slips. Barbara followed, smiling at the British pronunciation of lieutenant. He shut his door so as not to disturb the operators and sat behind his desk, puffing on his pipe and thumbing through the sheets. Barbara waited patiently for him to speak. "I see that young Ensign Reese is finally coming round," he observed without looking up. "It's about bloody time." Catherine Reese, 20 years old and terribly homesick, had not taken well to being uprooted from her home in Southern California, trained day and night in Washington, D.C., and then flown across the Atlantic to do even more training in wartime London. After that, she had found herself stuck in an underground bunker with some very intimidating foreign women who all seemed bent on browbeating and embarrassing her. Now, with several weeks and several skull sessions with Barbara later, she seemed to be getting the hang of her job. "Yes, sir," said Barbara. "She's a good girl. It just took her a little longer to settle in." "Understandable," said Hawthorne. "And what about that young Miss Taylor, eh? I hear she's rather keen on a lad down in Swansea." "I know that she's talked about a boy she met the last time we were in town, sir, but I don't think—" Hawthorne looked up at her, and his eyes, bloodshot from too little rest and too much smoke, were far from friendly. "Lieutenant Moore, your little holidays into town are a privilege, not a right, and you do well to remind your charges that there could be German spies anywhere. I believe you Yanks coined the term loose lips sink ships." "Yes, sir," she said slowly. "I understand, and I'll talk to the girls about fraternization." "Right. Now then, I keep seeing some odd signals coming from our southern receiver." He held up 4 slips. "4 notations in the last 3 hours. What do you make of them?" Barbara studied the contact slips. "I've listened to them myself, sir," she said after a moment. "They're not Enigma signals, and they carry no voice transmissions. They're not Morse or any variation of Morse code. But they're most definitely man-made, just a series of tones with no intelligible pattern." Hawthorne sighed, and a cloud of blue smoke encircled his nearly bald head. "Well, it appears that Jerry is trying out something new." He coughed and spat into his waste paper basket. "Pardon me," he apologized, and handed the slips back to Barbara. "Right. Give these to Miss Carstairs and have her make the routine transmission to Station X. Perhaps they can make some sense out of it." "That will be all, Lieutenant." "Yes, sir." Barbara took the slips and left Hawthorne to his pipe. To the right of Hawthorne's office was a short hallway, at the end of which was the outgoing signals office, currently manned by Squadron Leader Elizabeth Carstairs and Flight Officer Victoria Hastings, 2 of the more civil British women. They smiled as Barbara entered. "More traffic for headquarters, eh, love?" asked Hastings, a freckle-faced, sandy-haired girl from Glasgow. "That's right, Vicky," said Barbara. She handed over the slips. "Bloody hell," Hastings whistled as she thumbed through the stack. "Your lasses are staying busy this shift, eh, Barb?" "Yeah, there's been more of that weird signal that we've all been hearing since yesterday." "Yes," said Carstairs, a petite, dark-haired young woman from Cornwall. "What do you think Jerry's up to?" Barbara shrugged. "You got me, Liz. I might try to make some sense of it when we go off shift. There's a pattern in there, but I can't concentrate on it when I'm on the board." "Let's meet back up here at 16:30 then," suggested Hastings. "Let's all get our heads round it and leave the rest up to the bloody French tarts." Now, Vic," chided Carstairs. "Let's be civil with our guests." "What the blazes for? They're rude and arrogant." She crossed her arms and snorted. "And as for that general of theirs, de Gaulle, well—" "Blimey," said Carstairs, rolling her eyes as her young friend began another anti-French tirade. "You'd better leave now, Barb, before we renew the 100 Years' War." Barbara giggled as she turned to leave. "See you girls at 16:30, she said over her shoulder as Hastings continued ranting at the ceiling. USS Barb. "Set the maneuvering watch," Matthews ordered from atop the bridge. The provisioning was done, and the sea and anchor detail was on deck, ready to cast off the lines and get underway. On the horizon, the sun was trying to break through the trailing remains of the previous night's storm, and it cast a reddish-orange hue on the sky above the broken clouds. Matthews and Dunaway looked up at the red sky and shared a smile. "Red skies at night," Matthew began. "Sailor's delight," Dunaway finished. They were both anxious to get underway and on station. Matthews had briefed Dunaway on the mission parameters as soon as he had returned from his meeting with the Admiral, and they reviewed the orders in detail together. Now it was just a matter of getting underway, and Matthews could then inform the crew. "Captain, engine room reports ready to answer bells," said Schwartz, the bridge telephone talker. "Very well," Matthews raised a megaphone to his face. "Cast off all lines," he called to his men on the deck. As he did so, he turned and shouted down into the conning tower hatch. "Engines all ahead slow, rudder amidships." The helmsman repeated the orders, and the surface of the slip behind the submarine began to froth and churn as the twin screws began turning. Barb slowly pulled out of the slip and into the Portsmouth Harbor's main entrance. Santiago 4. Barbara rewound the large tape reel and replayed the recording for the 10th time since coming off duty. Vicki Hastings and Liz Carstairs sat next to the playback machine with their headphones pressed tightly to their ears. The recording lasted exactly 12 seconds, and when it was done, Hastings shook her head. "Sorry, love," she said to Barbara. "Can't make anything out of it except a bunch of unusual tones. It's a strong signal, so it's close." Agreed, said Carstairs. What bearing did the DF gear come up with? Atop the ersatz windmill high above them was a direction-finding antenna array that, using simple trigonomic algorithms, could help triangulate signals with other operators up the Welsh coast. Barbara checked one of the slips in her hand. The bearing was 225, she said, southwest of our position. Are there any islands out that way big enough for somebody to transmit something like this? Carstairs consulted a chart of the Atlantic south of the British Islands. I don't see anything that way, she said after examining it. Perhaps it's someone on the extreme northern Spanish coast, but the signal is bloody strong for a station that far away. What about a U-boat? Asked Hastings. I'll bet Jerry's got one parked right off our coast doing picket duty or something. The other women thought about that for a moment. The Germans have never used a signal like anything like this, Barbara said at last. The frequency is wrong, the signal strength is wrong, the tonality is wrong. I don't think it's German. Who else could it be then? Hastings wondered. It's not an Allied signal. We know all of those by heart. And if it isn't Axis, then what else could it be? Hawthorne sauntered into the room, slowly consuming a sausage sandwich that he had constructed in the refectory down the hall. And what are you lassies up to this evening? He asked. Still puzzling over that signal, are we? Yes, sir, said Carstairs. Have a listen, Group Captain. She handed him a set of headphones, and he replayed the signal for him 3 times. He said thoughtfully as he removed the headphones and resumed attacking his sandwich. Where is it coming from? They showed him the chart and the bearing from which the signal originated. I have to agree with Lieutenant Moore. I don't believe it is German at all. It sounds more like a beacon to me. A homing beacon? Asked Moore. Why put a homing beacon somewhere in the North Atlantic? What is there to home in on out there? At this moment, nothing is out there, but that could change, of course. He shoved the remainder of the sandwich into his mouth. I believe I'll contact London personally on this one, he said, forcing the words through the food so that they sounded muffled and moist. Perhaps they can dispatch a Sunderland or a submarine to make a run down this bearing. He chewed and swallowed loudly. Right. That bearing does sit astride one of our more trafficked shipping lanes. I would not put it past Jerry to stake the area out and pick off a passing merchantman or two. The Jerrys are a clever mob, whatever else one may say about them. We will see what London says, however. Good work in any event, lasses. He patted Barbara on the shoulder. Carry on. Latitude 49 degrees, 40 minutes north. Longitude 6 degrees, 34 minutes west. The strange sphere sitting on the bottom of the Celtic Sea alongside the wreckage of USS Cushing rumbled and shook, frightening a school of haddock that were feeding on a large group of plankton nearby. A large mass of bubbles appeared at the sphere's base, and a thin crack appeared on its skin. The crack began at the base and extended slowly up both sides, bisecting the orb, followed by more bubbles. The long cable extending from the top of the sphere went from emanating a solid green glow to pulsating rhythmically. Presently, the cracks met at the top of the sphere, and the 2 hemispheres fell away from each other until they rested on the seabed. A sickly green light now came from inside the 2 halves, pulsing in time with the cable that waved lazily in the ocean currents above. The light attracted many forms of sea life, most of which were unaccustomed to light sources there below the photic zone. Groups of anglerfish, lanternfish, and bristlemouths began approaching the now open sphere. A 55-foot colossal squid, intrigued by the movement of the other fish, followed slowly and glided silently along the sea floor. The fish circled the orb quietly until their attraction for the light outweighed their fear. They turned towards the open sphere and approached until they were less than 50 feet from it. There was a sudden flash of green light all around the bisected sphere, and all the fish, as well as the massive squid, immediately went motionless. A moment or two later, they were all gently turned onto their backs, and the ocean currents gathered them up and propelled them towards the surface. The green light gradually faded until all again was black on the sea floor. A small dark shape, another sphere much smaller than its cousin, emerged from the larger and began to rise in the water. Once it had expelled its smaller counterpart, the larger sphere began to close. Once whole again, it resumed its silent, bubbling vigil, while its diminutive cousin rose towards the surface. And that is that. Okay, well, we just finished Chapter 2 of Cloaks and Barbs. Tomorrow was Saturday, so we're looking at weekend update either tomorrow or Sunday. I don't know if we'll do any reading this weekend. We'll leave story time for the weekdays, I think, but we'll evaluate it. So, but we are at looks like at the end of our tether today. Do appreciate you spending time with us and listening to me ramble on about Rush and listening to me read my own books. Always enjoy doing that. So tomorrow we'll see you, either tomorrow or Sunday, we'll see you for a weekend update. So on behalf of our producer Elsa, our engineer Lily, and Finn, our security and call screener, live long and prosper. See you again soon.